Hello everyone, so welcome to the next section. So here what we're going to look at now is Google integration, Google Sign integration, and our cloud storage or Firebase storage. All right. So where we're at now is we have our database, we have basic authentication, and we're storing our donations to our Firebase database. So what I want to cover now in this overall section is allowing the user to sign in with their Google credentials, and then be able to initially store their profile pic, and then be able to update or change their profile pic within the app and store that in Firebase. Okay, so again, just to kind of a quick look at the different sections. So that first section there, excuse me, is just a general overview of the Google integration itself, how we as developers would go about integrating Google Sign-In into an Android app so that the user would kind of get the same experience while using our app as they would with any other app that has Google Sign-In. The second section there is kind of just a general overview, similar to what we've done in previous sections, general overview of an introduction to cloud storage, and then looking at some of the platform itself and the configuration that we would do in to our own our console, our own Firebase console, and then looking at some of the snippets and some of the ways that we can store different types of files. So whether they're images, whether they're flat files, we kind of walk through again some of the examples taken from the developer docs in that respect. Okay, the next section there is our code walkthrough. So we look at, I kind of tie it to the labs quite closely, so that we look at the approach that we take and kind of focus in on some of the important code snippets dealing with specifically the Google sign-in, and then working with our storage, our cloud storage, and been able to store that image, and also been able to then, as I discuss in more detail in that section, the kind of the knock-on effect of a user changing their profile pic, that we also have to change their references to the individual donations that they have made in the database. So that we're go into a bit of detail there and focus on the code that's necessary for that. Okay, and then just kind of bring it all together, as I said, with the lab itself. So taking you through bringing in that Google sign-in button option for logging in, the whole authentication process, and then allowing the user to be able to store an image with a donation, and then if they change the image, how we go about changing all that. Okay, I suppose one point to note is that I've taken a certain approach and tried to integrate it as best as possible into that whole MVVM, and kind of segregate out different classes to do specific jobs. There probably is better ways to do it. When I get time, I'll go back and I kind of investigate it again, see can we make it a little bit more efficient. But for the moment, we are still hopefully sticking with the MVVM approach. So we bring in a couple of new models, view models, some more live data to allow us to stay within those the kind of the structure and that particular pattern. Okay, so I will hand you over to that first section, which is that Google sign-in integration. So thanks for listening, and goodbye. Hello everyone, and today I want to talk to you about Firebase authentication again, but specifically Google authentication through Firebase. So we'll be signing in with Google, and a little bit about the cloud storage, Firebase storage. And we'll kind of deal with storing the user's Google's profile pic. So when they sign in with Google, we'll actually grab that profile pic and store it up on Firebase storage. Okay, so just a quick overview again. This is kind of what we looked at in the general authentication section. So, but just to recap, most apps need to know the identity of a user. Knowing a user's identity allows an app to securely save user data in the cloud and provide the same personalized experience across all of the user's devices. Now, what we looked at already, which was Firebase authentication, provides backend services, easy to use SDKs and ready-made UI libraries to authenticate users to your app. It supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, and popular federated identity providers like what we're going to use, which is Google. So you can let your users authenticate with Firebase using their Google accounts by integrating Google sign-in into your app. So that's what we're going to do in the lab as well. Okay, so specifically with the Google Identity Platform for Android, you can allow application users to sign in with their existing Google accounts. It helps you in knowing your end users and providing them with a better enriched experience in your application. As soon as you allow the user to use Google Sign-In, you can easily get info about that user, such as email, display name, and the profile pic. That's what we're going to grab as well. You can also get, for example, access to the user's Google Drive account, allowing them add an event to their calendar, share with their Google contacts, or whatever. So any of those apps that you're familiar with already, where you were asked to sign in with Google, you get access to all this extra information, which is really, really nice. And it's all done relatively seamlessly. All you need to know is what properties you want to get at, what scopes you want to request, and we look at those in some of the code snippets. And once that's all set up, and I'll be using the same link again with that GitHub repo, Google give you most of the kind of setup code to begin with. So there's really not too much extra we need to do. Anyway, overall, it's a quick and easy way to engage end users in your application. Okay, so there's that link again. This is on the developer docs themselves. There's a link to it up online, integrating Google Sign-In into your Android app. There's a couple of different ways to do it. There's kind of different ways, different kind of navigation paths on the docs themselves. I've picked a particular one, which I think is the most straightforward one. So what we're going to cover, as I say, is Google authentication through Firebase. You could actually do this separately and just kind of authenticate against the Google servers through your own web app, through a mobile app that just has no Firebase backend. But because we're using Firebase, I thought it made sense just to continue on with that, and we'll authenticate with Google Sign-In, but through Firebase. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is, and hopefully you've done this already in previous labs, is create your Firebase project. So the assumption here is that we already have our Firebase project available to us. In previous labs, we would have set up and authenticated against a basic email and password. So now we're actually going to set it up for Google Sign-In. So the next few slides are just kind of screenshots, just taking you through what to expect in that particular setup. Okay, so if you see here for ourselves, we will go back to your console, back to your authentication tab. You'll access your Google link. Okay, that will ask you then to enter some information. I just changed this myself. If we actually have a look at it on the next slide. So I changed it so we would just enable it, give it a name, give it a particular email, and this is tied to the fact that if there's any, as I said, support information that might be necessary, or you want to attach that email to some other stuff you're sending out, that's what that's required for. Just save on that, excuse me, and then you end up with this. So we're back to now our Google authentication is enabled, as well as our existing email password. Okay. So you probably have that done in about 5 minutes. Pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Okay. The next thing to do is actually set up our sign-in method, and again, a couple of different ways to do this. But we need a specific key, like you would have done with the maps with Eamon, and we will do again. Okay, in a kind of similar section in this, we need to get our SHA-1 fingerprint from our application and associate that then with the project. On our Firebase console. So there's a detailed kind of step through in the labs, but this is just a screenshot of the link that I would take you through. So I give you extra screenshots in the lab itself. So getting your SHA-1 fingerprint, which you probably may have access to already, and then how to associate that with your project. Okay, when you're finished, you will be presented with this particular screen. Okay, so it's telling you to download this particular client information, has your client ID. I've copied out my own client secret because that would be specific to everyone, right? And they're asking you to kind of to download that and use that as part of your project. What I find that it does get a little bit tricky. So what I would recommend doing, I can stand over this, and I know this works, is go back and re-download your Google Services JSON file and just overwrite then and bring that back into your project. Okay, and if you need to, as I said, you could do all this manually. You could just go into the project settings and add it separately here. So if you can see here, I've added the fingerprint, I have the package name, right? So you could manually add it that way too, but that step through process would kind of do all this for you, kind of a little bit automatically for you, okay? So again, I've gone back to this GitHub repo for Firebase, the quick start -Android, loads of information in it. I took the email, a lot of the stuff from the basic email password authentication. I took the database stuff. I'm going to do the same for the Google sign-in and a little bit of the storage as well, okay? So to look at some of the information that's on the developer docs and take you through those steps. So the final thing is you would configure your Google sign-in and this new object here, this Google sign-in client. So this is how we get access and to the Google information that we want to then use within our app. So just to kind of read through it there for you. So in your sign-in activities on create method, configure Google sign-in to request the user data required by your app. For example, to configure Google sign-in to request the user's ID and basic profile information, create a Google sign-in options object with the default _sign_in parameter. To request users' email addresses as well, create the Google sign-in options object with the request email option. So that's what we're doing down here. So where we want to get the user's email, right, or requesting the email, should I say, as well as the basic user's ID. Now, you can actually request a lot more stuff there. So I think I have it on the next couple of slides. If you wanted to request access to their calendar, access to their Google Drive, there will be other requests that you would attach to this, the options, the Google sign-in options, and we're just calling it GSO here, and we will pass this off somewhere else in a minute. But it's at this point you decide what you want to get access to and what you want to request from the user's Google sign-in kind of profile, okay? Oh, sorry, yeah, one final thing there, this is important. This here, this request ID token, we need this to authenticate against our Firebase backend. So this default web client ID, that will be embedded in your Google-JSON file. So that's kind of important there. So just make sure that when we are requesting this, and this we can use this to authenticate against any backend server. So if you had a Node server, some other kind of web backend, you would still be using this request ID token to authenticate against that server. For us here, because it's Firebase, it's all done nice and seamlessly for us. A little bit of extra work you would have to do to authenticate against a separate backend, but it's definitely doable. Okay. So just look a little bit more about it. So if you need to request, this is what I was talking about, if you need to request additional scopes to access the Google APIs, specify them with request scopes. So for the best user experience on sign-in, only request the scopes that are required for your app to minimally function. Request any additional scopes only when you need them, so that your users see the consent screen in the context of an action they performed. So there's a link there up online. A simple example of that would be maybe working with the maps, because there's no point in requesting access to your location when your app starts if you only need it when the user goes to the map. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about there. Then also in your sign-ins activity on create method, create a Google sign-in client object with the options you specified. So again, this is what we're using here. So here we are. We're just assuming this has been declared elsewhere. We will actually be declaring this inside our inside our donation, our app, the application object. Okay. Now, for some reason, the developer docs, they mix between Kotlin and Java. So you can see here, this is actually kind of with the little semicolon at the end. This is Java code that we'll be using, but you get the idea. We're just calling on the Google sign-in client, which is kind of the part of the SDK, get client on the activity itself, right? So this will be we'll be seeing this kind of stuff inside our home activity, right? And then we pass in those options. So again, those options specify what we're requesting. For us, it was a basic email, but again, there's a lot of other stuff you could request there if you needed to. Okay. All assigned, all instantiated with our Google sign-in client, and that's what we use then later on for authentication purposes, for getting at the actual Google information that we want. Okay, so some of this we've done already. So here we are creating our authentication, our Firebase auth. instance. And here we are initializing it. So again, we would have seen this already. We have done stuff like this before. So let me sort out there our thing again. So there we go. Okay. We then initialize your activity. When initializing your activity, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So again, we would have already done this inside we have our on start inside our login activity. So we're just checking to see if we do have a current user, and that will either return null or non-null if the user signed in, and then we would have passed it off to our update UI method, which will in turn check to see again if it's a null, take the user somewhere else, maybe ask them to sign in, or and authenticate, or if they are already signed in, take them straight to the home screen. So again, some of this, a lot of this actually we kind of have already. Okay. So after that, once we've kind of done the initial setup for authentication, we can then add the Google sign-in button to our app. Again, all part of the SDKs. All you really need to do is bring in the sign-in button into the layout. So you can actually drop this in like so, right? We're just calling it sign-in button, and again, I'm going to keep it the same. No point in reinventing the wheel, okay? And if you want to, right, what you can do is you can change, and this is what we do as well. You can change the look and feel of the button. Again, this is kind of Java code, so we could actually just get directly at our sign-in button because of our Android extensions, and we will change it slightly from the default look, which is this one up here, which is kind of the white button, and we will change this in our code to something like this. So we have kind of to kind of stay in tune with the application itself, the color scheme that we're using, so it looks more part of the app, I suppose, really. So what we do is, for us here, as I said, that would be the Java version. So again, nice little comparison here again, why Kotlin is kind of nicer to use. Here we are directly accessing our sign-in button, setting its click listener on the activity itself, which is our login activity. So if the user clicks on our sign-in button, we will take them off and take them through a different flow as opposed to just the basic sign-in and authentication against email and password. Okay, and we look at that code specifically in the next section in the code walkthrough. Okay. Continuing on with our kind of sign-in flow, right? So in the activities on click method, handle sign-in button taps by creating a sign-in intent with the get sign-in intent method, and starting the intent with the start activity for results. So again, now this is, as you can see yourself, obviously this is Java code. We will have something similar to this in our when the user clicks on the sign-in button, and we're handling that, but we will still kick off. We're just adding to the existing code that we have already in our application. So we're going to modify our sign-in method that's there at the moment. Okay, so just following that again, taking it from the docs themselves. Here we have sorry, just go down to the next one there. Yeah, there we go. So here's our once the user has clicked on it, we've created the intent. So after the user signs in, you can get a Google sign-in account object for the user in the activities on activity result method. So if you can see here, this is the input. We already have this in existence, most of this already, where we create the task, we check to see are they signed in, we get the signed in account information from the intent. So that data, that gives us back the kind of the raw data from the server. We get the account information. So in this case, the Google sign-in was successful, and then we authenticate against Firebase. So we use this Firebase auth with Google, passing in that account information. So it's kind of like a two-step process here, because we're using our Firebase backend, that we initially authenticate against the Google servers to make sure that the users has signed in correctly with their correct username, correct password, all the rest of it. And you'll see that kind of process in the lab when you initially set this up. If you don't have, and you probably don't have, multiple accounts on Gmail accounts on the emulator on the device, it will take you through that process to set that up, then sign you in, and then what we do in our own app is then authenticate with Firebase using, as I've done already and we continue to do here, the code, a lot of the code that is supplied by Google to get you started. Okay, So that's we'll be basically taking this whole function as is, whole method, and just updating our own on activity result. Okay. And so inside the Firebase Authenticate with Google method itself, the function, there's the account, our Google sign-in account object getting passed in. So inside it, here we are just checking the credentials, checking the auth provider, right? So that's validating against the Firebase Google sign-in that we enabled back on the console. Okay, and we have there's a callback there based on it. So if it's successful, if it works correctly, right? So inside if the task is successful, just have some logs there. I've actually left them in so you can keep track of those in the app itself. We get the current user, which will now be our Google user, and we pass that off then to our update UI, so we can then just take them into the straight into the home screen. Okay, otherwise just the built in there, look, if something goes wrong, just tell the user, sorry, couldn't authenticate, little snack bar pops up, authentication failed, and then we update accordingly the UI with the null, which keeps the user on the login page, and then can obviously allow them to log in again if they need to. Okay. Some extra bits worth knowing about, right? It says you can also get the user's email address with get email, which we're doing. The user's Google ID, right, for the client side with a specific get ID, and as we're using as well, an ID token for the user with the get ID token. So that's kind of a unique ID that you could use, kind of like we were, if you can remember back to our Mongo ID, kind of that unique ID, so it uniquely identifies the individual user. If you need to pass the currently signed in user to a backend server, send that ID token to your backend server and validate that token on the server itself. So again, this is all looked after us automatically with Firebase, but if you were working with a different backend, that's the token you would need to be passing off. Okay. Extra bits there. Some of the, if you wanted to, right? So you can see here we have our Google sign-in account. So that's this will be inside an activity. You can see it here. Again, this is Java code for some reason, right? We will see our own stuff, obviously, our Kotlin code when we look at the labs, but we can there's methods there, get the display name, get the given name, get the family name, email and ID we're looking at. This is relevant for us. Just change this again. We have a get photo URL. So there's a photo URL property that we will be accessing via Kotlin, and that will give us a URL of the user's Google profile pic, which we will then store in Firebase, and specifically the storage. Okay, I think that's about it. Yeah, so we look at what we do with the Google authenticated user in the code walkthrough and the lab. So we'll be looking at, I think it might be covering storage next. Can't remember. It's like one or the other. We cover it all eventually. And then in the code walkthrough, we kind of cover both the Google authentication, the Firebase storage, and then in the lab, it will take you through that, setting up with the key, setting the buttons, signing in with Google, and then that whole kind of process where we can change the image. We then associate that image with the user's donation. So again, I will cover all that in the code demo itself. So if you want to just jump to the end of this video, the full video, you'll actually see a little quick walkthrough of your app in operation. Okay, so other than that, thanks for that. It's a couple of references there for you as well, and we will talk to you soon. Bye all. Bye bye. So today I want to talk to you about in this section Firebase storage, or now it's been rebranded as cloud storage. So this is kind of like the final piece of the puzzle in the overall app, where we want to now be able to store particular files, for our case images, in storage, and be able to access them then within our app. Okay, so just to give you the official kind of spiel about what Firebase and Google tell us what cloud storage is, right? Cloud storage for Firebase lets you upload and share user-generated content such as images and video, which allow you to build rich media content into your apps. Your data is stored in a Google Cloud Storage bucket, an exabyte scale object storage solution with high availability and global redundancy. Cloud storage lets you securely upload these files directly from mobile devices and web browsers, handling spotty networks with ease. So again, nice little addition to the whole backend service. Okay. Some of the key features, again from the official docs: integrate storage into your APIs with a single unified API. or into your apps, sorry, with a single unified API. Optimize your price performance across 3 storage classes with object lifecycle management. Access data instantly from any storage class, designed for secure and durable storage, and reduce data storage carbon emissions to 0. Okay, so a little bit of the old kind of green footprint there as well. So basically using all the official docs wherever I can. So getting started with cloud storage on Android, link is there for you. So if you want to, you can visit that to see a much more in-depth discussion and all the different links you can follow. So what I've tried to do is bring together an abridged version of all these, the process that you would go through for getting started with cloud storage. Okay, so for us, specifically within our app, I will take you through then kind of the steps to bring that into our donation app. Okay, so the first thing is create your Firebase project. Again, we're assuming that's done already. Okay, so we quickly go through some of that, and again, what follows now are just some of the screenshots, similar to where we were setting up authentication, then database, then our Google sign-in. Now finally, we're having a look at our cloud storage. Okay, so process. So you'll go to your console, you'll go to your storage section. Okay, hit the get started button. Surprise, surprise. That will then ask you for applying some rules, so you can just take the defaults. Okay. Now look, if you want to go back in and change some of that stuff, you can. All we're making sure here is that we're essentially saying any authenticated user can read and write. Okay. So, but for our purposes, that'll be fine. Okay. You'll be asked to change your location. So again, I've just picked, I think I have on the next screen. Yeah, I just picked the one of the suggestions there for Europe West. Okay, so but look, if you want it, you can pick one. Just note that once it is set, you can't change it. Now, for our purposes, that's not going to really make a difference, but maybe applicable if you're actually building an app and it's going to be maybe primarily in Europe versus in the States or whatever. Okay, so just kind of something to consider on that end. Okay, when you're finished, this is what you get. So there's the actual reference to your bucket. The reason I mention that is if you've only got the one bucket, you don't need to explicitly identify it. But if you have more than one, then you do. And we'll look at some of the code snippets in that later on. But here we have in our storage section, it's empty at the moment, but this is where we will see when we start adding our images, and I'll take you through that in the final kind of demo walkthrough. We will see see this change and see our users' profile pics getting updated. Okay. Now, excuse me. Once you've done that on the console side, next thing is to configure your app within Android Studio itself. So again, look, we've kind of done all this before. You'll run through kick off your Firebase, your Google Assistant, or the Firebase Assistant. That way you'll scroll down to your storage section. Okay. Then you get your connected, you'll add your cloud storage. That'll pop up, it'll prompt you for the changes to your Gradle. Now, I actually lost a bit of time on this, more than I would have liked, right? Even though I had all my updates done and it was prompting me to take in or implement and add this dependency version 16.04, right? The actual final version, our current version at the time was 19.1, and I was getting a lot of errors when trying to write my images, and it was just basically down to the version that was there. So make sure that you have the latest version of Firebase storage dependency in your app when you go and run it. Okay. So again, I think I have that. Yeah. So important there. At the time of when, as of end of November here, that's the dependency version 19.1, and that's what I'm using obviously in the labs to get this to work. Okay. So again, for the final piece of the puzzle is actually starting to upload or download your particular files, and I found some nice examples in our repo again, right? Our quick start for Android repo. So if you want to look at that again, I would definitely recommend just downloading that whole repo and having it on your machine or whatever you're working on, because it's a very good resource for a lot of examples. Okay, but that's what I'm going to be using. So for taking the official implementation path from the developer docs themselves, the first thing is we would integrate the SDKs for cloud storage. which we kind of have done if you follow those processes there. We go create our reference, so we get a link to our storage the same way we got a link to our database and our kind of authentication, all the rest of it. We now get a reference to our storage. We then go off and do our uploading and downloading of images, and if you want to, we can then actually secure the files and so apply those security rules. Okay. But as I said, we're kind of going to stick with the default read and write stuff. Okay, so similar to what we, as I said, we would have done with the other stuff. Here we are getting a storage reference, and from our Firebase storage, getting the instance. Okay, and that's it. As it says there, you're ready to start using cloud storage. So we've got our reference. Okay, and now as I said there, if you want to, if you notice, as I mentioned previously, if you've only got the one bucket, just a call to get instance is fine. If you have more than one bucket, you might need, or you do have to specify the specific one there. So that would be listed on your console. So that's easy enough to get a hold of. Okay. So as I said, if you're working with more than one, you can still access those separately as well. Okay. So the first kind of step in terms of uploading files, okay, again, I've taken these screenshots from the official docs themselves. So to just talk through it, to upload a file to cloud storage, you first create a reference to the full path of the file, including the file name. Okay, so here we are now. So we are getting our reference. Now we will store that reference again inside our application object. Okay. Actually, hang on now. Let's just see here myself there. There we go. Got rid of it. So here we are referencing. Look, there's our child nodes again. So from the reference, this would be the this is assuming that this mountains.jpg file is at the root. So we're just saying storage ref and at the actual file itself, right? But kind of makes more sense to keep it in, if you want to call it a separate folder or subfolder, should I say. So here we're saying storage.ref.child images/mountain.jpg. So we'll kind of do something similar. We'll keep our images, our photos in a separate photos folder, okay? And we like to keep it a little bit organized, okay? Just point to note there, while the file names are the same, the references point to different files, okay? So we can say the name would be the same, but the path wouldn't be, because one is at the root, the other is inside a subfolder, okay? Just final point there, once you've created an appropriate reference, you then call the put bytes, put file, or put stream method to upload the file to cloud storage. So there's, as I said, there's three different methods there to allow you to upload files to storage, okay? So in the notes here, in this particular presentation, we'll have a quick look at how you could use all three, right? But we'll actually be kind of mainly working with either put bytes or put stream, depending on what we need to do, okay? So to look at some examples of that in a bit more detail, right? So uploading files, so when it's in memory, okay, we use the put bytes. So the put bytes method is the simplest way to upload a file to cloud storage. It takes a byte array and returns an upload task object that you can use to manage and monitor the status of your upload. Now, if it's a small image, probably not going to be too much kind of monitoring needs to be done. But if it was quite large, or even if you wanted to upload, it was kind of like maybe a video or a lot of images, you could, and we look at those some of the little methods that you can keep track of monitoring later on in this presentation. So here we're assuming that it's an image view that we want to upload. So similar, we will be doing something like this ourselves, because we'll take the simplest approach. So this image view at the moment is a default placeholder when the user logs in, if you can remember, on the nav drawer. So we're actually going to change that to hold the user's Google profile, and that's the one we want to upload. So we'll be accessing this kind of that particular image view. So here we are just specifying a few properties there, saying we need to enable cache to allow us to get at the and convert it to bitmaps, okay, or to bytes, should I say, sorry, to convert the bitmap to bytes. So this is the code that we're using here. We're just saying create a bitmap instance out of our image view, okay. We then have just BAOS byte arrays output stream instance. We then invoke or pass that into the and compress that down into a data object, so we can see it there. So we're saying val data BAOS dot to byte array. Okay, so we're passing in the byte stream there. So this is a method function that we can invoke on the bitmap to convert it into the format that we want. So it's just a bit of compression stuff going on there, specifying a particular format, specifying a ratio there as well. And then we actually use that then in our task. We say upload task mountains ref, so that there's our reference. Just change my color again for you. Our mountain reference dot put bytes and that data. So that will actually push up the file as a stream of bytes. Okay, and if you want it, you can track it here. So the put bytes, that's one call. There's our task. We can then keep track of the task. So if something goes wrong, we have our on failure listener, so we can have a callback there if something goes wrong. Otherwise, if it's successful, right, we can do other stuff there. We get back this snapshot instance, kind of like the result basically, and that contains your file metadata, size, content type, other stuff there as well. Okay, and last point there, because put bytes accepts a byte array, it requires your app to hold the entire contents of a file in memory at once. So if it's actually quite large, consider using put stream or put file to use less memory. But look, for what we're doing, it's actually going to be straightforward enough. Okay, just to look at other examples there. So from a stream, using the put stream, again still uploading. So the put stream method is the most versatile way to upload a file to cloud storage. Put stream takes an input stream and returns again an upload task that you can use to manage and monitor the status of the upload, like we can do with the put bytes. So here this probably makes a little bit more sense, right? Easier to understand. So here we are, there's our stream. So we're just specifying, we're creating from that stream, we are, let me just change my color again here, don't I keep changing, right? We are creating a file input stream from a file reference, okay? And specifically here is this reference. So this would be on the device itself. So it could be the gallery, so you could open up, you could take a photograph wherever that's stored. So you would get the path, pass it in there, right? We then, here we are using the same reference, but we're just calling put stream instead, and there it is, virtually identical. We have our on failure listener and our on success listener as well, so we get the same callbacks that we can keep track of, checking to see that it does upload successfully or not, and if so, we can do stuff with that. Okay. And the final one, from a local file, right? You can actually, similar to what with the previous one there, so you can upload local files on the device, such as photos and videos from your camera with the put file if you want, right, method. Put file takes a file and returns an upload task which you can use to manage and monitor the status of the upload, again like all the rest of them. So in the previous version where we created a stream from the file object, here we are creating an actual file reference itself. Okay, so there we get the file instance. We use our URI. We'll be seeing that again later on. So just getting that kind of the URI reference that we can, which will access the particular, in this case, local file. Here we are using our storage ref.child, and here we are saying images, right? And this is useful to know. We're saying the file reference, right, is the full path there. So that would be quite a long path, but broken into different parts. If we want to just store that via its file name, which is rivers.jpg, that's what that gives us there. The last path segment actually extracts for us this part here. So using our dollar notation, we'd actually get .child images / rivers.jpg, but uploaded as a file itself. Okay, and there we are. Look, the same crack again. Upload your task, the particular reference you want, .put file, and then the file instance that we're passing in itself. Okay, and same as before, we have our add-on failure and add-on success, so we can keep track again to make sure it works okay. Okay. For a little bit extra worth noting, and we will make use of this as well. After uploading a file, right, you can get a URL to download the file by calling the get download URL method, or it'll be just .download URL for Kotlin for us, on the particular storage reference. So here, so this is looking at taking a little bit more advanced. So here we are, we have our reference. So we're attaching to the reference. Here we have an upload task. So we put the file, okay. And now we have a little bit, we're using the task API of that deals with our cloud storage, right? We create a URL task, so all down here, okay. And we have this just kind of the kind of Kotlin, some kind of advanced kind of generic stuff going on here. We have upload task.continue with task, so we get a task reference, right? If the task is if it's not successful, right, we're just going to throw an exception so we can keep track of that. Otherwise, we get back the reference.download URL. So this is a reference to the URL that was uploaded and references this image in cloud storage. So we could then use this and assign that somewhere else to give us a reference to the actual file that's up on our storage, okay? And what we're adding on here is we're just adding a complete listener that once it successfully completes, here we are updating, we're getting from the task the result and associating that with this download URI as opposed to your URL, right? And that's what we would store. Okay, so that's what we're actually going to, we will see something like this ourselves in the lab later on. So as well as it's a feature within the storage approach that Firebase have, that when you upload a file, whether it's an image, whether you've done it through, whether it's via put bytes, put file, or put stream, right? You actually get a reference to its download URL. So however it's stored online in storage, you can get a reference to that in your upload task. So even though you're uploading, you can actually get a reference to it for downloading. That's what we're doing here. Okay. Some of the worth noting, I suppose, some of the callbacks to listeners for keeping track of and monitoring progress. So you can see it here. We have our on progress listener. We have on pause listener, on success, on failure, fairly self-explanatory. Just points to note there, on failure listeners called with an exception instance, other listeners are called with an upload task snapshot object. So once the task completes successfully, that's what you get back, this task snapshot, and that's what you can get the result from. You can get metadata from, a lot of other information. And again, that's what we will see some of this specifically now tied to our donation example. Okay. Now, once you've done the uploading, right, and you want to download, so even if we say you didn't trap the URL or URI when you were uploading, right? But if the file exists in cloud storage, you can still get at it, get a reference to download. Okay, so you can get a reference by appending child paths to the storage route, or you can create a reference from an existing GS or HTTP reference URL referencing an object in cloud storage. So what you can do, something like this. So we've kind of seen this before. So we get our storage ref. Here we are, the path ref. In this case, we're looking for a stars.jpg inside our images, right? We can then if you want to create a reference to a file from the Google Cloud storage, get reference from URL, so your gs/bucket/images stars, right? Or you can create a reference from a HTTPS URL. So we can create it like so there, storage.get reference from URL, passing in like so your Firebase storage through the API itself. Now again, you have to just be careful with the characters, special characters, or whatever the case may be. So images/stars, there's a %20 because it's we're looking at a reference URL HTTP versus the bucket. Most of the time you'll probably work with this here, and this is what we will kind of stick with this as well. That's a lot simpler, lot straightforward to work with. Okay. Excuse me. So once you've got your reference, right, how you download it, right, a couple of ways to do it. So in this case here, we can, and again we use this ourselves as well, we can download the file to a byte array with the get bytes method. This is the easiest way to download a file, hence that's the way we're going to do it, but it must load the entire contents of your file into memory. For our purposes, it's actually not going to be that important, because our files are only small little image views, little profile pics, so it's not a big deal, I suppose. But look, obviously if you're downloading videos or really high quality photographs, could be a different story. If you request a file larger than your app's available memory, so this is why I'm kind of talking about it, your app will crash. So to protect against memory issues, Get Bytes takes a maximum amount of bytes to download. Set the maximum size to something you know your app can handle, or use another download method. So here we're specifying just 1 meg to download, and that's fine for us because the images are going to be quite small. So here we are getting a reference to our image again. Here through we're calling it island ref, and then we're specifying a size like so, and then we have our island ref.getBytes, and then here's our callback dot add on success listener. So this reference here is referencing this file here. So we're basically saying, go and get that file, pull it down as bytes, right? And if it's successful, right, then we do what we want to it in here. Now, so again, we might have to, we would be converting it back into an image as well, and we will see some of that stuff later on. And if something goes wrong, just handle the errors accordingly there, okay? So this is, as I said, it's the easiest way to do it, but just make sure that you do set a size on what the maximum size to download is that you know your app can handle, okay? If you want to take a little bit further, download to directly into a file, okay? So the get file method downloads a file directly to a local device. Put myself back up there. Use this if your users want to have access to the file while offline, or to share the file in a different app. Get file returns a download task, which you can use to manage your download and monitor the status of your download. So we've seen some of this before. So there we are getting our reference. Here we are referencing a temporary file. So val local file. So we're creating a temporary file in the kind of the root images. It's going to be of type JPEG, and then our reference itself, we get file, passing in the local file, and then we have our callback add on success listener or add on failure listener. So again, if everything goes okay, the file will be created, and we can do whatever we want to then there. Maybe go off, find it, load it up somewhere. Otherwise, maybe inform the user something went wrong, maybe check your connection or whatever the case may be. Via URL. Okay, so if you already have download infrastructure based around URLs, or just want a URL to share, you can get the download URL for a file by calling the get down URL method on a storage reference. And we've seen that before, but you can actually access it directly outside of the that upload task that you would have been using to get the reference to begin with. So you can your storage ref.child, the specific image .download URL. Now the assumption here is this will only be successful if this file actually exists, right? If it doesn't exist, you're going to get your failure in here, right? So this would get the particular download URL, right? So in the snapshot that's returned, it would hold that download URL, and then you can go off and share it, do whatever you need to do with it, okay? Maybe store the reference in in your database, or whatever the case may be, okay? That's it actually. So we look at how we work with files, and those particularly images, right? Save to cloud storage in the code walkthrough and the lab. So again, the next section we'll kind of bring those two together, and we look at some of the code snippets that we are in the code walkthrough, and then we'll actually see it in operation in the lab itself, okay? So a couple of references there again, same as before. There's some of these ones specific just to storage. And thanks for listening, and talk to you soon. Bye bye. Hello everyone, and welcome to the next section in this week's material. So what we're, again, just to recap, that we're looking at working with Google authentication, and then being able to store an image to our Firebase console using that storage facility. Okay, so the way I've broken it down is I've tried to tie it in with the lab as best I can. So the main sections that we need to step through, and then I focus on kind of the main code snippets and kind of functionality that's going on, is these 5 steps here. So initially we're dealing with giving the user a Google sign-in option, so that they can sign in with their Google credentials. Because of that, we can then display their profile image in the nav drawer. So we'll have to look at how we can grab the user's profile pic from Google and then display it within the at the moment the default kind of Homer image. We'll then look at storing profile image in Firebase with those donations. So initially, when they log in, if it is their Google profile pic, what we will do is we will store that Google profile pic in storage in Firebase, as well as and associate that image with a particular donation. If they're not signing in with Google, if it's still a standard email password, we will store that basic kind of standard default picture image of Homer. Okay, the last two there then kind of ties back to maybe previous case studies you've seen, where we allow users to update their profile pic so that if they want to, they can click on that image and change whether it's the default Homer or whether it's their Google profile pic. We can change that. Now again, this is just within the system, so we're not actually changing the user's actual Google profile. That would take a lot. There'll be a lot more involved in that, but we are going to just obviously give them the user to the option to have a more personal experience within the app. So if they want to change their image, that they can. And then finally, because they've changed their images, the user would expect that any kind of existing donations that are there and that they've made already, tied to a previous profile pic, the user would expect those images to be updated. So that's what we need to do then as a kind of a final piece of the puzzle, and again we cover that in the lab. Okay, so we'll initially look at the Google sign-in option. So what we have here is we're bringing in a new class, Firebase Auth Manager, kind of so tying in with the kind of trying to stick with this MVVM approach again. So what we have within our Firebase Auth Manager, where we initially just were dealing with that standard kind of Firebase user and just dealing with the email password, we're now bringing in our Google sign-in client, okay, which will be specifically tied to their Google details, okay, and because of that, we introduce a couple of new functions. We have one function there to just configure that Google sign-in, so to decide on the kind of, won't call them permissions, but what we're requesting. And again, we'll look at that in a minute. And also then a function, Firebase Auth with Google, that will take that Google sign-in account and kind of integrate it then into our own application. Okay, so there are the few functions we'll have a look at just tied to our Google sign-in. Okay, so looking at our configure Google sign, just kind of setting it all up. I suppose one point to note here is I've taken a lot of this from the official developer docs, and I have kind of the links and the references both I think in the lab, but at the end of this section as well. Excuse me. And then I've just tailored it to suit our own MVVM kind of implementation. Okay. So all this here I would have basically taken directly from the official Google Docs. Now, one point to note, and I kind of mentioned this in the elsewhere as well, because this default web_client ID is only generated after you build the project. You may get errors on this resource while you're in development and you're looking kind of pre-build on your application, and that's fine. It will still actually build, it will run, and it will deploy and run correctly. Okay, so just kind of a little FYI on that one. Okay, so as I say, what we're doing here is we are requesting just a basic email, right? So if we wanted to leverage the our Firebase and our Google sign-in credentials, and we wanted to also maybe get access to their Google Drive, maybe with the Google Calendar, this is where you would do that. You would request these other kind of features that you want to bind to this, to your Google sign-in options. Okay, and then what you do is you go off and using, and again, this is all part of the library, so you need to make sure you have the correct libraries and dependencies as well as part of your project. We update, we have a Google sign-in client. So again, this is mutable data. This is within our Firebase Auth Manager. We pass in that GSO, as we call it there, GSO, right, into the Google sign-in get client call. So that will go and kind of coupled with your Google JSON or your JSON resources file that you pull down from your Firebase, confirm that you are who you say you are, and validate all those details behind the scenes. So this is all looked after for us within the library, so we don't have to write all this extra code ourselves. We essentially set up the Google sign-in options, what we want to request, and then we go and get it through that Google sign-in object there. Okay. So if we just continue to look at that, so that was our the configuring. Okay, so now the actual Firebase auth with Google. Okay, so this is kind of just making this is our callback, so to speak. So if you see here, we have an add on complete listener tied to an if else. Okay, and again, I've taken most of this from the developer docs again and tailored it to suit our MVVM implementation. So in here we have our Google sign-in account. Here we are getting the credentials based on that token from the Google, ECCT, the Google sign-in account, and using our Firebase auth.sign-in with credentials, passing in that credentials object. Okay, we have our .add-on complete listener. Now you could have a .on fail or on failure if you wanted to, but this is what they kind of supply in the docs, and it seems to work okay. So I'm happy enough to go with that. So what we do is, if that will return a task, this task instance. So if that task is successful, that means that the sign-in was successful, and we update with the users, with the signed in users information. So all I'm doing here is just a kind of a little log to the console. Again, kind of in a release version, we probably wouldn't want to have these in there, but we update our live Firebase user with that now Firebase auth.current user. Okay, so that will now be, our live Firebase user will now be tied to a Google user as opposed to that kind of standard email password validation. And otherwise, if it's not successful, so if something happens along the way and we don't get to sign in correctly, we don't authenticate, what I do is I keep track of this error status as well, so that we can refer back to this. So if something goes wrong, or if the sign-in fails, right? Now I suppose we could display, and we do back in the UI, we will display a authentication fail to the user. But internally, we want to just keep track of that error status. So I set that to true. So that's just kind of another property that we add within the model that we're managing for our authentication. Okay, so where we actually then use that, so this is back in our dealing with the UI back inside that initial login activity. Okay, so what we want to happen is when the user would sign in with Google, so I would have given you the code there in the lab to add the button, kind of configure it to look like a Google sign in button. Okay, so this is what we're just binding to it here, using our view binding again, and then we have a simple click listener tied to it, which triggers that Google sign-in function. So inside our Google sign-in function there, which you can see it there, what we're doing is we are tying in with our login register view model. This is our MVVM, the .firebase auth manager, the .get client .value .sign intent. So we're creating a new intent, okay, based on those that sign in intent property that we've previously set up, and we start our own intent. Okay, now as I said in the lab, I'll take you through that kind of the complete code you need for all that. So instead of when we launch this intent, instead of jumping off to an activity within our fragment within an activity inside our own application, what we are tying into is the Google libraries and the Google sign-in process that kind of we're all familiar with. So what will happen is, if there is an account on the device, what will happen is a little dialog window will pop up. You'll be presented with that dialog window to choose a particular user, and then when you select that user, we will go through then the previously looked at authentication process, and then if it's okay, we will move on into the app itself, and if it's not okay, we just get that authentication failed. And if there isn't a user on the device, again, all looked after first. We don't have to write this ourselves. You will be taken through adding a new account to the device. So as if this was a kind of a new phone you were setting up. There was no Google users, no kind of Gmail accounts on the device to begin with, and you'll be asked to log in to Google with your Gmail account, kind of accept some kind of permissions and what have you, and then you can choose that account, and then you can proceed again to authenticate or not against the application. Okay, so that's all tied to the Google sign-in. Okay, now what we do then is, once we have authenticated correctly, what happens is we are taken then to and launched into our kind of home activity. Okay, so one of the next steps that we're dealing with here is displaying that profile image in the nav drawer. So inside that on start, and where we're observing that logged in user, right, what I now add in is, once the user is not null, right, we call update, or have a function called update nav header, which passes in that Firebase user that we are kind of observing. So any changes, so if we were to sign out and sign back in again, new user, new Google credentials, new profile pic. Okay, so what I'm doing inside, we'll look at it again later on, but just to give you the kind of the quick code snippet now, inside that update nav header function, what I'm using is, I'm using Picasso to load up that image. So what we do is, and again, take it through the lab in this, whatever our current user happens to be, and I'm doing some checks here again. So if there is, we will, and I'll cover this now in the next few slides, but what we're doing is we're going to add a new field, new property to our kind of our model, where we introduce this photo URL, so that we can keep track of a reference to that image, and that will tie to, if it's a Google user, will tie to the user's Google profile pic. Okay, so just doing a little check here, making sure that there is a URL and that there's not a display name. The reason I'm doing this check is that if you only sign in with your basic email and password, there is no photo and there is no display name, right? We're taking those from the Google credentials. Now, there's different approaches we could probably take with this. Maybe you could set a default display name, but this is just the approach I was taking. So what I'm doing here is, if this is technically a Google user, I set the display name, and then I use Picasso to load up that photo URL tied to the current user into the nav header image. Okay, and again, I would take you through this in the lab itself. We'll put this inside of a kind of a helper class as well. Okay, so what we get with that is something along these lines, is that these will be this Dave Tester's credentials. So here is his display name, here's his Gmail account, and for us, more importantly, this is the user's profile pic taken from the Google credentials that we have assigned within that photo URL. Okay, we'll see later on how we get to store that in our up on Firebase, and ultimately then how we could actually change that if we need to. Okay, so looking at the actual saving of that, what I do is I bring in a new separate class again, or in this case it's kind of an object, kind of a singleton, so we can just work with it directly. We have our properties there, so we bind to the storage, and I have an individual image URI that I'm going to keep track of. Again, mutable live data, so that we can observe it, so when it changes we can reflect those changes immediately. And I introduce a couple of kind of helper functions. Okay, now I've kind of left in the comments that I kind of had for myself, just as the little kind of a to-do list, kind of a checklist, right? So there's quite a lot we need to do. First of all, we have to check the storage for an existing profile pic. So if this is a user coming back, okay, and has already signed in, we need to check to see, does that photo exist, and ultimately has that photo been changed, because if they sign in with Google and they've changed their profile pic, it's the profile pic we need to get from Firebase. Okay, so what I'm saying is, if that is true, so this I will do some kind of basic checks in there. If that's true, we're going to update then the image URI, this here, with that current URI, so that going forward, any donations that the user makes, that's the URI, that's the image we want tied to those donations, right? If it's false, which means there is no existing profile pic, right, then we go add it to storage. And again, if it's a Google user that's signed in, we have to add their Google profile pic. If it's a default user, then we have to add the default image. Okay. And also tied to updating, we have to again call that check storage for updating a profile pic, and if one does exist, then we have to overwrite that existing photo, which has the knock-on effect of kind of requiring us to update any existing donations with the new profile pic. And again, I cover this in the demo, the last video of the app actually running, and I kind of have the console, my Firebase console open, so when I change the image, you can see the ripple effect through the collections on in our database of those changes being made. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at some of these functions. Okay, again, I'll give you these in the labs, but just to kind of talk a little bit about it here. So if we look at the first one there, are checking storage for an existing profile pic. Again, most of this I would have taken from the developer docs, okay, and just modified it to suit the needs of our particular application donation. Okay, so we're accessing our storage here, and again, we're getting, like we saw with the database, we're getting in. I have a photos folder essentially up in my Firebase console within storage. And then I'm going to use, to uniquely identify, I'm going to use the user's ID to name the image so that it's easy then to associate the image with the user. Okay, if you wanted to just have one image across the board, you could actually use the file name itself, but because each user will have a different image, we obviously need to uniquely identify. So I'm using the user's ID that I'm passing in here to determine the name of the file. Okay, now the way this works is, even though I'm trying to reference an image, right, if that image isn't there, it'll fail, but it's not really an error as such. It just means that the image doesn't exist. So there's a subtle difference between something actually going wrong here and as in an error and a kind of possible potential crash in your application, or just an image not existing. So this will return or will be kind of successful in terms of that the image ref will have metadata, so excuse me, and information about the image itself. So if the image exists, we get the add-on success listener getting triggered, which in turn we actually download it. So we can get at that download URL, and once that completes, again, this is all taken directly from the developer docs, we update the image value URI with what was pulled down. So that's that will be the download link. So every time we load up our application, we can access that image and pull it down. So rather than having to download it every time we kind of refresh the page or whatever, I will update that image URI, and then because that's observable, if that changes, then changes are reflected across the overall application. And again, even though it's an on-failure listener, all it means is that the file doesn't exist. So I set the image URI to an empty property. Okay, so that's just kind of one little point to note there. Okay, so that's just a code to check the storage. Now again, look, this is my particular approach to it. You could decide on a different approach, and that's fine. There's a lot of different ways to implement this. I just tried to factor it out as best I could and be able to reuse these then functions and these code snippets at different stages within the application. Okay, the upload image to Firebase, again, quite a lot going on there. So what we're passing in there is the user ID, a reference to the actual bitmap that we want to upload, and then a boolean to say whether we are updating or whether we're kind of adding, because they will be two separate things. Okay, and again, I've tried to comment it as best I can there. You can see we get the image view, so we get a reference. We have this we create a byte array output stream, we create this upload task. Okay, and then if we do a little bit of compression on it. So these are taken from the developer docs. Working with bitmaps, they're always compressed. Obviously, try and make the probably call it the upload speeds as quick as possible. Okay, and then we convert that to a byte array. So we're working with bytes. And then I have working with our successful listener on the metadata again. So if the file does exist, right? So I do a check for are we updating an existing file, and we use our task to do that. Okay, so I'm within the upload task. Get the new download URL, shall we say, right? Update our image URI, so we're getting a new image URI here. So we're looking at updating. So the user's gone off and chosen to change their image, and then we use our Firebase DB manager to update that image across the board. Okay, so we're passing in the user ID and the new image URI. So that's what causes that ripple effect that you will see in the demo as the last video. And again, final one there. If the file doesn't exist, we simply just update get the new image. So the image has been saved, and we update our image URI with that download link. So then it points to this is kind of like the first time that the file has been written and has been uploaded to our Firebase storage. Okay, let's look a little bit more on that. So what we kind of get within the storage is when the user signs in, we get in our, you can see there, this is in our photo. So look, there's a couple of photos going on there. So this is tied to that unique UID that Firebase has given the user. I just stick a .jpeg on the end of it, and again, just to show you, there's the image itself. So when we go back, or if we go back, and if the user goes back and wants to change this particular image, we have to go in and update this particular image. And the problem is, every time we update an image, the URI referencing that image will change, and that's why we need to have that kind of that update feature in there and have that ripple effect through the application. The ID obviously stays the same, but because the image has changed, the reference that Firebase keeps in storage to that image changes. So that's why we need to update it across all in our database and our donations as well. Okay. To look at the changes that we made inside our kind of our model, so to speak. So inside our donation model, here we are bringing in our profile pic. So just call it just of type string. So again, just be careful that we use it, keep it in the mappings as well. Okay. So this is how we can, even though we have kind of a separate links and a separate storage area for the photos, we still need to keep a reference to it inside our model itself. Okay, so that each donation will have a link, a reference to that profile pic. Okay, so this is to kind of just manage the changes. All right. So inside then our update nav header, these are the extra changes that we make. We are leveraging our Firebase image manager. So there we are inside that image URI. So we're observing this. So we're keeping track of that. So anytime that image URI changes, all this will get triggered. Okay. So what we're doing is again checking to see if the URI is empty, there's nothing exists. Checking to see if there's a photo URL. So is it a Google user? And if it is a Google user, update the image with that Google users, and then update the passing in a reference to the nav header image. Otherwise, we update with the default. So this is, we're choosing the user's Google photo. We're choosing the default launcher image if this is the first time that the user's kind of signing in and there's no images in storage already. Otherwise, there is an image, so we need to load that existing image from Firebase. So here we leverage the user update image, passing in the user's ID, again getting at the existing image URI, and then just identifying the nav header, the location, I suppose, the object that we want to update, which is that nav header image. So inside this, we'll see it now in a minute. That's where we were using Picasso. That was that code snippet that I showed you earlier. That's where we're using Picasso to update those details. Okay, and then finally we update the email with the user's email, and if the display name is not null, we update it with the user's display name. Okay, so again, different settings depending on whether you're a Google user or whether you're kind of a standard email password user. Okay. So in terms of managing those images again, and in terms of dealing with the kind of stuff that we would see inside the adapter, so to speak. Okay, so each time we load a row, what we're doing is inside our bind function, here we are, as well as assigning the donation and using kind of our view binding. Here we are using Picasso, getting in at the donations profile pic, converting it to a URI and passing that into the .image icon. So this is the little code snippet that you will see in the changes that you will need to make inside your adapter to load up and assign an image to each donation that's added in your report. Okay. So this is what you get, something along these lines. So if you've signed in with your Google user, this is what it'll look like. Again, Google user here again. This one is actually changed already. It's not the default one, but you can see here these are all images that would be now stored in Firebase in the storage bucket, I suppose, essentially, right? So the last kind of thing to do is allow the user to select and click on that Navdrawer image and update their image. Just to show you how to kind of tie back to, as I said, previous case studies. So again, a little bit going on here. So what we have is we would tie to that nav header image a little click listener, which will trigger one of those helper functions that show image picker, very similar to what we would have seen previously, passing in a previously built up intent launcher or a reference to an intent launcher. And here we are registering that image callback, so that this is what we want to happen when we return back from the picker, so that the user has chosen a particular image. And again, here we are using our Firebase image manager, our .update user image. So we're getting the particular logged in user's UID that's taken from Firebase. Here we are calling read image URI, so that's getting a reference to the URI that we want to that we're pulling from the device itself. And then we're specifying the nav header image that we want to set. So it's inside here, you would have covered that before, the update user image. That's where we can upload it, and we check to see, is it the first time they've logged in? Do they already have an existing image up on Firebase within storage? And then going through all that process again, if it's there or if it's not. Okay. So what we get is an inside our update user image. So this is kind of a first full look at that. So essentially it's the using Picasso in different shapes and forms. Okay, so here we are passing in, and again working off that update, whether we're updating or not. So here we are where we implement a kind of a callback within Picasso itself. So this is a slightly more advanced usage than we would have seen in the adapter. Okay, so again, this all ties back to the fact that, does the image exist? Does it not? So we are loading into, you can see it there. We have there's our image URI, which has been passed in. So that's the one we're getting from the whether it's a URI from the device or whether it's a URI tied back to an existing image that is one of those default images. And we're using our upload image again here to Firebase, passing in the user ID, passing in reference to the bitmap, and then a true or false as to whether we're updating or not. So hopefully that all works okay, and if it does, the image view, we set the image bitmap, so that will cause the user's image to update and cause the image to be uploaded to Firebase. Just for completeness on all the callbacks, we have to have our on bitmap fail. So at the moment, I just have my little Timber call in there, just saying that we couldn't process the bitmap. Something went wrong. Maybe there was something corrupt about the file that when it was opened up from the device and passed in here. We could, if you wanted it, maybe tie in some extra messages there, but from a kind of a release point of view, maybe we might just remove that, like I've done with this one here on prepare load, because there's nothing we're preparing prior to uploading this image, so we just leave it empty. Okay. So what you get with all that, something along these lines. So when the user signs in, this is taking us to our if a user does exist, we get to select a particular user. When they're signed in, there's their profile pic. If they choose to change the image, they get the picker, which is updated here, which is then also updated within the list as well. Okay. So how we go about updating those, and that's kind of like the final piece of the puzzle, okay, is running through the collections in our database and updating that profile pic field as necessary. Okay, so here we are binding to both the user's donations and the kind of the list of all donations. And what I do is I do most of my processing then on the user's donations here. So again, just because it's a child user ID, it's tied to the specific user ID. So in here, I'm adding an add listener for a single value event. Inside on our data changed, this is where we actually cause the updates to happen. So I run through, I basically pull down get the snapshot of all the donations tied to that individual user. Okay. I update and set that value to the new image URI, right? There's the particular profile pic field, right? And then because we already have because we're going through each donation, I get the donations on all donations. I cause another update on each donation or each user's UID. Sorry, I take the UID from the donation that we're looking at. So that means as we're running through all donations, we're only going to set the value of the donation that matches the user's donation. So this is only going to update the relevant donations that are tied to the particular user. Okay, you could do it separately. You could actually do all this again and pull in a separate snapshot and run through the collection separately, but I just thought this was a little bit more efficient, because if we're inside and we know the user ID of that's tied to the donation anyway, we don't need to look at those donations or change those donations that don't match. Okay. But again, as I say, a lot of different ways that you could implement this particular feature. Okay. So what we get there then is this example here. If the user has changed their profile pic here, it gets changed, and within the list in our report, we get to see the new updated image, which in turn is updated in our storage. So again, you could keep an eye on that yourself. Just make sure that the image has been updated, but notice that the ID, I know I have a commented out here now, we're kind of blocked out, but the ID, the user ID and the name of the image will be the same. But I would encourage you to go in and have a look at the actual URI that gets generated by Firebase, because there's extra metadata tagged onto the end of it, and that changes every time you update that photo. So that's why we need to go back and update our database with that new URI. Okay. Other than that, I think that's about the lot. Yeah, there's our references. Okay, so again, as I say, a lot of those code snippets I would have taken from those developer docs. Loads of examples up there. Great when they're that quick start Android within Firebase up on GitHub. Loads of examples, and then I would have just tailored it to suit the MVVM approach and tied it in with the live data with the particular view model. So we've introduced some new classes there specifically for managing a storage and working with those images. Okay, So look, other than that, thanks for listening, and any questions, again, as usual, you can find me on Slack. Okay, so thank you. Bye-bye. So welcome to the next version of Donation. So in this version, we're bringing in Google authentication, and we're bringing in cloud storage, and the way we're going to demonstrate the cloud storage is the ability for the user to change their profile pic when they sign in. Now, if they happen to sign in with Google, which is what we'll kind of run through in this version, we're only changing the profile pic on the app. We're not actually changing the user's Google profile pic, because that's a whole other kind of set of steps we'd have to go through. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, if you look at our console over here, or this is my console, should I say, sorry. Okay, I have a couple of that I've been testing with. So there's my own one, there's tester again. So I've been testing with those. So what we'll do is I'll kind of run through a scenario where the user is going to sign in with Google for the first time. So they're not part of our system. They haven't made any donations. So we can just see that the slight changes made to our console, and just follow through when they make a donation, where the photo gets stored, and so forth. Okay. So if we go over to our left hand side here, so if we sign in with Google, click on our sign in with Google button. So what you're presented with are all the existing accounts that are on that particular device. So I would have already set up these two. Okay, so this is the new one I've just set up as my daughter Ella. So what we'll do is kind of, if this is the first time you're running this, you would choose add another account, so it would be empty. And what you'll be taken through then is the kind of the process to verify your you'll be asked to enter your Gmail, and then you verify that against the Google servers, and then you will automatically be logged in. Okay, so I'm just going to stick with Ella for the moment here, who I have just gone through that process, set up as a new account on the device. So now I'm going to select Ella. So I'm taking in, and there we go. So as you can see, there's no donations, but if we toggle, we should see the existing, which we do. So there's ones that are the donations existing already. So we'll just go back to Ella's one, just to confirm on our nav bar. So we have, there's the profile pic, there's her display name, and there's her email. Okay, so what we can do is just make a couple of donations. Actually, sorry, just to go back over to our console, I just refresh my console, and there now is our new user Ella, just after being added. Okay, so now if we go back, as I said, we look at our database. So again, similar features as before. We're just bringing in that extra usage of storage and working with photos, similar to what we would have covered in Placemark. Okay, so if we go back over here, back to our app, we'll just make a donation. So we'll donate. See that they're flashing up on the console. Do another one. Leave it at 100 there. Donate again. So there's our total, and there's it going up. And now if we go back to our report, so there's Ella's donations, and then if we toggle, then we see all the donations. Okay, so we just go back to Ella's as well. Okay, so now in terms of changing the profile pic, so this is where the storage comes in. Okay, so what we can do is we can click on the image, and we're taken to our UI picker. Again, now I need to go back to my downloads. I think I have them in downloads. Yeah, okay. So if we want here, look, we can pick this one. Actually, we'll pick this one instead. So there you can see it's changed, Ella. Okay. And more importantly, if we go back to our report, you can see that the image has also changed there as well. Because obviously, if this in a kind of a what the user would expect is if they change their profile pic within the app, any references to that profile pic has also changed. So there's quite a lot going on in behind the scenes. Okay, so if we go back over to just to look at our storage, just to look at the structure of our storage. So what we have is we have our photos folder. And within that, again, this is just my own approach. You could take a different approach in terms of the folder you want to set up. You could even, in theory, I suppose, have a separate folder for every user, but just for our particular example, I felt this is kind of straightforward enough. So if we click on some of these photos, so that's the default one, and we see where there's our the UID, or the unique identifier for that particular photograph. Okay, that image, sorry. So that's what ties back to our application. So if we were to look at go back to our database and find, this could be a little test now. Let me see. Where's our lease? There's just Ella. So that's the one we just set up. So you can see down here in our profile pic, this is the extra property, the extra field we're using to keep track of that image, so that if the issue that we need to be aware of is that when an image is stored in Firebase, it's given that unique ID. If we go and add or change a new one, it gets a separate ID. So we would need to actually, just as a test, if I leave this open for you, right, we can go into, if I go back to our Ella, if I change the image again, pick a different one there, here we just pick this one. You see it all changing in the console. So we've run through and we've updated all references to that particular image. Okay, so that when we go back to our report, there's the image also changed again, which is what the user would expect. Okay, I run through that in a bit more detail in the code walkthrough. But if you want to just briefly take a look at the code, or some of the code anyway, in the project. So go back to our version of donation at the moment. One point to note, actually, just leave this open. I mentioned this in the lab as well, so just expand this. Okay, even though this is showing up as an error and it can't find this, okay, this is within our configure Google sign-in. So this is kind of just the going through the Google authentication process. This particular resource is default _web _client ID. This only gets generated after the application is built and then run. So at pre-build time, it doesn't exist, but you can't. The application will still build, it will still run, and then will actually correctly allow the user to authenticate, as we've seen in the demo. Again, possibly just a small little bug that's within Android Studio for the moment and this whole process. So if you were to go in and look at your build folders, you will find a values folder inside that, and inside that you'll find the strings, and inside that you'll find a reference to your web _ client _ ID. Okay, strange one at the moment, but look, maybe it'll be fixed. But at the moment, don't worry about it. If that's showing up as an error, that's the reason why. Okay, so if we go back to, actually, sorry, we're in there, so we can, so to kind of briefly look at while we're there, I guess, the Google authentication kind of code we've brought in. So the function there, just setting up the sign-in options. At the moment, I'm just working off the basic email. Right? You could request other sign-in options, like access to a calendar, like access to Google Drive, possibly. So this is where, if you wanted to add in extra stuff, that's where you would put it. The only other bits are, like here, other sections are Firebase Auth with Google, I'm calling it. Now the thing is, most of this I've taken from the official developer docs and just modified it, refactored it to suit the MVVM approach. Okay, so these code snippets and the examples you would find and that I would kind of refer to aren't tied to that pattern. So using view models and live data isn't part of that. So there was some changes we needed to make, which I would take you through also in the lab. So there's not a huge amount that we add in our Firebase Auth Manager. Okay, so in terms of just bringing in the extra Google authentication, the same, there's our login or register as before, just doing some extra checks there. So when we initially create our instance, there's our configuring our Google sign and those particular options, and then running through what we want to authenticate against, which at the moment we're just setting up and just that basic email. Okay. There's a bit more work done inside the DB manager. So I can just open that up for a second. So in terms of retrieving data and updating, so there's an extra function we bring in. So here we are updating the image reference, as you saw there in the demo, that when we change a profile pic, we need to run through and update each reference to it. So that's within both collections, both in all the donations and then in the specific users' donations. Again, tied back to the approach we're taking, but you can see it here. I'm just kind of binding to the two separate users and all donations, and then running through a snapshot on the data change. Okay. And grabbing the individual donation there and then updating internally. This is with the specific user donations, and then we can actually leverage that with all donations because we know what particular UID we want and particular donation we want to change inside that for each loop. So we're kind of trying to optimize our multiple updates there between the different collections. Okay. If we go back to our we have a new Firebase image manager. Again, try to follow the same kind of approach we've taken with the others. Again, there's a nice bit going on here. I kind of go through in a little bit more detail in the code walkthrough. But essentially, there's a number of things we need to check. Number one, when the user logs in, does the image already exist? So we need to grab that image and then kind of pull that down and update it accordingly. If it doesn't exist, do we need to add it to our storage because it's the first time the user is logging in, or do we just need to retrieve it and then display it? And then if the user is changing their profile pic, there's all that extra work we need to do where we run through the different collections and update that particular reference. So even though it looks straightforward enough from the user's perspective, and all they're doing is changing a photograph, an image, there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes just to ensure the consistency across both the user's profile pic and then any donations that the user has made. Okay. But like I say, kind of run through it in more detail in the code walkthrough. Okay. So other than that, I think there's not much more to talk about. The approach we take with the user changing, I'll go back to our app again for a second, when they select the image is very similar to what we would have covered and you would have covered in previous examples, that placemark example. So you will be seeing a lot of similar code. It's just in this particular example we're obviously applying the MVVM pattern, so we're working with view models and live data, so there's a little bit extra we need to do, but essentially we still get the same result. User gets to click on a photo using the SAF, the UI picker, to change that photo, and then we just update that back in the cloud to reflect what changes have been made. Okay. Look, if there's any other questions on it, any issues you run into in the lab, you can get me on Slack. And hope you've found it a little bit interesting. And we're kind of, you can see yourself, it's getting quite complex now, and we've a couple of more features just to bring in. But as I said, we're nearly done with this with our donation. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and goodbye.